right here is where my 900-year-old friend Frode is. So of course you're feeling that, just that sensation that you're describing, Sarah. That's because Frode is right here.
Hi, I'm Kat.
And I'm Gabe. And we're the Ghouls Next Door. Talking about spooky stuff, but not today. Although, I guess the ecological apocalypse is terrifying. We've covered that. Just the condition of what the Earth is pretty scary, and we've covered that often. On today's episode, it's super special, similar to what we did with Take Back the Night. We are talking to creator of a really interesting film. It's a little outside of what we're usually covering, but it was just super interesting to me, especially after we covered in January or February when we did Tigers Are Not Afraid, and they had that blend of magical realism and just kind of that exploration of like what is real to people that I found very fascinating. And so this documentary really captivated me. So we are going to be talking about the Seer and the Unseen, and we have invited the director and creator of this program to talk with us about it, Sara Dosa. Hi.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes. Welcome to our show. We're super excited. Kat, will you tell us what the Seer Unseen is about so we can dive in?
Yeah, The Seer and the Unseen is a magical realist documentary about invisible elves, financial collapse, and the surprising power of belief, told through the story of an Icelandic woman, a real-life Lorax, who speaks on behalf of nature under threat. Through her story, Seer explores the surprising power of belief in the invisible forces, be they the elves or the market, that shape our visible world and transform our natural landscapes.
Thank you, Kat. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
And we are joined by Sara Dosa, who is a documentarian whose interests lie in telling character-driven stories about the human relationship to ecology and economy. And a lot of people don't put those things together, but they actually are pretty natural. Like there was a lot of questions that came up when I was just like watching just about like humans in general of like, you know, why we choose to believe one thing over something else, and really like questioning, you know, what it is. And on our show, we are often trying to find this like through line between the two narratives or what is perceived to be two different worlds in media. So specifically horror media is what we're usually in. So we talk about like the real world issues and then like the film, like and how well it might be telling that story. And we do occasionally take a step back to kind of talk about, you know, a broader image and how media itself can be used to tell like those two stories. And I feel like your film really weaves like magical realism with like the elves, and then also like incredible reality with like the financial collapse that's told in there in such a fluid way that allows for people to ask those questions of like, why do we believe one thing and not the other? And, in your previous documentary, the last season, you were telling the story of the trauma of war and using that and the experiences of those soldiers who then turned to wild mushroom hunters. So very peculiar, unique story that just absolutely fascinate me. So thank you for coming in here to talk to us about it. And I just to kind of start it off is just what draws you to these specific stories? Like what intrigues you to like, all right, I'm going to embark on the journey that is creating a documentary about this very like niche topic for however long it takes.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first, just thanks again so much for having me here. It's a joy to speak with you both. I think for me, these kind of niche topics, they spark delight in my mind. But for me, kind of as a filmmaker, I gravitate towards not just stories about the human relationship to the natural world, as you know, you mentioned earlier, Gabe, but I look for symbolism. That to me, I'm endlessly fascinated by how humans make meaning and where we derive symbolism. And for in my film, The Last Season, which is about these mushroom hunters, it really focuses on the story of these two veterans, one who was a sniper in the Vietnam War, and a man who was born in Cambodia who was a Khmer freedom fighter who fought against the Khmer Rouge, and their lives intersect in the middle of the Oregon woods in search of this obscure, this very rare mushroom called the Matsutake mushroom that in the early 90s fetched hundreds of dollars per pound
Wow.
in the mushroom trade. But I was really excited because they had such a powerful story of friendship and family and healing. Which is kind of what the film's about, but they were in search of this mushroom that grows underground. It's connected to the roots. The roots of the mushroom, also known as mycelia, connect up with the roots of pine trees, and they have a symbiotic relationship. And I was just kind of awed by the fact that here was a story of these two men that on the surface didn't seem to have much in common, yet it turned out underneath they both shared this deep trauma, yet desire to heal and form family that you didn't quite see. And so kind of the fact that they're in search of this mushroom that had this whole story with it about connection and regeneration, to me that just felt really powerful. So I love those kinds of stories that feel kind of multivalent, in a way. And The Seer and the Unseen, very different, a story in Iceland about elves and financial capitalism. But to me, I kind of understood Ragga's, our protagonist, Ragga, our elf whisperer. I understood kind of her journey to protect this lava field where elves live. I thought it invited kind of like it became like an allegory for kind of understanding these wider stories of what we believe in. And if you unpack really what happened in Iceland prior to 2008, when their entire economy just completely imploded due to this banking fiasco, when you actually unpack what happened there, it's absurd. Like it's really absurd. And the language that people used was this language of magic, of people getting rich overnight, money seeming to appear out of thin air. It was economists and common people kind of using this language all at once. And so to me, it's interesting that something that seems as kind of normal, mundane, everyday as money can be just as magical as this world of elves. So all to say, I get really excited about those symbols and those kinds of plays with meaning. But it all comes down to the people of the film. And I feel so lucky that in Ragga, we found a phenomenal and inspiring storyteller. And in The Last Season, my two protagonists in that film too were just such fascinating, strong, hilarious, wonderful humans who luckily invited me into their lives. So.
Yeah. And to be so comfortable too. And I get it. Like I feel like I'll tell you my whole story too. When we were watching, Kat had like similar thoughts to what you were saying regarding money and just like the wealth, like not the wealth, but the power that we put behind what is honestly just an idea. It's just like what other people tell us to believe in. And it really is not anything. Kat, did you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I literally wrote down quotes that I really just enjoyed from Rafa. Specifically, she says, "What even is money? Like, I think it's more invisible than our elf world." And that really stood out to me. And as well as it's like the humans created a monster, which we have to feed, but is never full. And I think that's like really interesting in even connecting like the mythical end to this very like, arguably money doesn't actually exist. So I guess not a real thing. But I just find it really fascinating, the buildup there. And I guess like, do you think believing in the stock market or the invisible hand is as mythical or faith-based as they say? Or do you believe in the hidden people?
Oh, great questions. Where to start? I feel like I could write and read all kinds of books and graduate school theses on exactly those questions. I'll start with the hidden people question. I've got to say, I entered this project. My background is in culture anthropology, and I kind of went into this project thinking like this is the belief in elves in Iceland is a cultural belief. Over half the country believes in them. I'm going to respect this belief and understand it, not criticize it by any means, but really like do my best to kind of immerse myself in this cultural reality and have empathy for it. But it was not a belief that was my own. So that's kind of how I entered Iceland. Once I got there, I've got to say I had experiences in nature that I couldn't explain in a language aside from the language of elves and Huldafolk. I felt a sense of presence and power in places where Ragga said, right here is where my 900-year-old friend Frode is. So of course you're feeling that, just that sensation that you're describing, Sarah, that's because Frode is right here. Like she had, there was very specific reasons for kind of what I was experiencing. It was an awe that I truly brought tears. Like my first trip to Iceland, the majesty of the landscape was so powerful that I had tears in my eyes. It felt spiritual. And so I could really kind of understand that language of spirits of nature in a way that I just hadn't personally experienced before. So gotta say, I began to believe. So, and Rocket too, it's just, she so wonderfully always talks about how to suspend kind of the critical adult voice, so to speak, and allow your inner child to come out to play is her language. And she often says, even if you don't know 100% if you believe or not, life can be a little bit more fun if you believe elves are present.
Yes.
Or if you think there's life inside a rock, it's not just a boulder, it's a whole community. Things like that have really shaped my relationship to nature, actually. So much so that, no, I have lots of stories, but it's been a real powerful transformation in my life to kind of really embrace this belief and weave it into my everyday. So it's my long way of saying, yes, I believe. I'm a proud believer. In terms of your question about the invisible hand, can you tell me your question one more time about that?
Yeah. I believe it was, do you believe in the stock market and is as mythical or faith-based as Rafa said?
I believe that belief and the powerful idea of shared value lay at the heart of a marketplace, of the stock market, and what drives capitalism. And I think it's incredibly complex. There's so many people, so many forces that play in. So I don't want to make it equivalent to the belief of elves by any means, but I do think that if you can take some specific stories, for example, the story of Iceland, where there were these speculative bubbles where bankers and economists were essentially placing value on assets that didn't quite exist and speculating off of that on speculation. So it's basically, if you imagine a bunch of IOUs stacking up one on top of each other, and that being kind of given as actual money, but it's all borrowed, that doesn't quite exist. There's an economic logic behind it. But there's nothing actually tangible. And once that money, like in Iceland, what happened was all these debts got recalled and there was nothing to ground it. And so the economy completely collapsed. I think stories like that really do expose how belief and kind of the basis of capitalism in speculation can be exposed as a construction of human, it's a cultural construction, of course, that has tremendous power and has very concrete effects on our daily life. But at its core, it does come down to what we believe and what we're told to believe. And when you're in a position of power, like in the Icelandic government, these Icelandic bankers that held such power, you're taught to trust it. You're taught to trust in those authorities. And so when you feel lied to, it makes for all the more of a chaotic and heartbreaking situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, and it's very sensitive, the same as like, kind of admitting that you believe in elves, right? It's like a sensitive thing. I was really fascinated by how others believed in the elves as well. Like even those who hadn't like seen them, they knew someone who had, or how it also like so easily like merged like the ecological like activists with like being like, okay, we have our same issue. It's just like we have two sides to this. And like I really appreciated hearing about the beliefs, because it had me thinking of like native peoples in America, or even like Afro-Taino in like Mexico or like Puerto Rico. Like there is a love, appreciation, and respect for the earth, right? And it really made me like upset about just like modern way of living. And there's some quotes in there kind of like about us leaving behind what those beliefs were. And you've like already kind of talked about like, your transition into belief as well. Because I was like, oh my God, this is great. But do you think that similar to how like Ragga was able to like collaborate with these activists who might not, like some of them might not even believe, and at some points even like kind of said she felt like she might be like a traitor because she was able to work with them to move the chapel. So do you think that maybe certain activists might be like, it would benefit them to collaborate with maybe certain beliefs like that are tied in interest in order to kind of like bring home, like get more people behind it?
Totally. Yeah, that's a great question. You're right. Ragga did. She encountered some criticism because she was talking to the authorities. Some people in Iceland thought that so I should say that the story of the road. Oops, sorry. Yes. Got picked up by international media, and it was told as a story of, the headline that I actually read, which first introduced me to the story, was entitled "Elf Lobby Shuts Down Construction of Road." And I was like, what's an elf lobby? And the environmental group was actually quite frustrated about that, because they're like, we're not an elf lobby. We're serious conservationists and ecologists. And this is a protected ecological zone. And a lot of us don't believe in elves. And so it created this whole discussion in Iceland actually about elf washing. And I thought that was really interesting, because it was something that it got a lot of attention internationally, but didn't necessarily fit what most people in this group thought was what was happening. But a really productive conversation came out of that, where people kind of agreed, yes, we all love the lava for all kinds of different reasons. And we should all kind of use these myriad arguments to save this beautiful place. And so I would say absolutely there's opportunities in activism, writ large, to do so. I see kind of this belief. You're absolutely, it's found all around the world. It's actually really fun whenever I've like mentioned the project, somebody will say like, oh, my family's from Hawaii and we have Minahuni there, who are mischievous spirits of nature who also live in the lava. Or like I'll just say it's a belief that's very prevalent around the world. And I think when we can understand nature as alive, it becomes so powerful, because so many discourses of capitalism tell us that nature is a resource to be exploited, or this a mountain is dead and thus needs to be developed. That empty, just the idea of empty space is something that beckons modernization, or again development. There's all these languages of nature as useless or inert, and so when we instead understand nature is alive, whether it's through all kinds of belief systems or thinking that elves live there, it can be a really powerful tool, aside from, of course, the birds, animals, life, plants that are there. So I'll just say I think of it as one of many tactics that are super important to be deployed, of course, with respect and true understanding, in terms of kind of these movements that we so desperately need to protect our planet. So
yeah, team up. Like we have a common goal, why not? Who knows if that might help influence someone to see it that way, right? Like if that was like to personify or kind of put an image to this thing that you're trying to save, it might make it a little more personal too. Like,
Yeah.
you're murdering the planet.
Totally. Yeah.
Doing,
This is absolutely like such a rudimentary, like oversimplification of it. But my little nephew is a toddler, and he used to like grab flowers and just kind of like pull at them. But I told him kind of, because Ragga says that there's little flower fairies in every single bud, and I told my little nephew like, oh no, there's a little fairy in each flower, there's a spirit to each flower, and let's say hi to the little flower. And so from then on he started going like hi instead of grabbing it and ripping at it. So it's again completely different thing than like a profound cultural belief that goes back 1,000 years. But I think it's that simple kind of teaching, like, no, this is life. This is life respected that exists here, is a really important argument that can just cause humans to enter into a different kind of relationship with non-human nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I found a lot of the cinematography to be just absolutely beautiful. Like there are just moments where I was just like in awe, like just watching. Like I was like, I've always wanted to go to Iceland, but it was like now I'm like, okay, how do I get a ticket like tomorrow? Because I could have just watched like a nature documentary with the imagery that you had. Even in like some of the abandoned like quiet places, like there was a beauty to them. And so I just wanted to ask, like, where was like your favorite place to film, or like that like really grabbed you?
Oh, thanks so much for saying that. I feel really lucky that I worked with a great cinematographer named Patrick Coleman, and we worked with a number of Icelandic cinematographers too, who were just fabulous to work with, but also like they were showcasing their home, and so that's always really special. For me personally, I just felt so lucky to get to run around with a camera all around Iceland. The West Fjords were particularly just enchanting in my mind. I had an artist residency there for about 6 weeks, and just completely fell in love with the mountains. But also the south of the country is geologically very young. It's a particularly volcanic region, and so you can really see kind of like the forces of the earth at work. You can see how the lava flows kind of stopped and were frozen in time. You can see how the wind starts to carve out at them. Like, yeah, it's so magical, aside from like the actual bubbling earth of geysers and the geothermal water. And so it's a spectacular place. It really makes sense once you're there. It's like, of course there's elves here.
If they were going to be anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course they're here. So the other thing too, across the whole country, and probably around like September through March, you get the Northern Lights. And that is like the most magical experience. As someone who hasn't grown up with Northern Lights, being able to see it is just like, yeah, lights dancing in the sky is such a powerfully enchanting thing. So,
yeah, even just like the song about the environment, where I think it was like their national anthem or something, where it's just like it mentions the Northern Lights and like these beaches, and I was like, man, that's even more that I'm missing just from this, just from this song, like that they're gloating, how amazing their places.
Yeah, but you should absolutely go. I highly encourage it. I hope you make it there.
Yes. Kat, do you have a question?
Yeah, how do you go about finding the people that like you go to for these stories? Like, what is your methodology in like finding your stories, but also like finding individuals who are like so ready to speak on these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. For the Seer and the Unseen, I read this article and that I mentioned before, and that article quoted Ragga a lot. And as in her quotes, I kind of sensed her to be like a serious activist and environmentalist, but I sensed a playfulness about herself. It's like she took her work seriously, but not herself. And I just thought, this is a person I want to get to know. And so I Googled I like stalked her online basically, and I found out that yeah, I know, very, very hard research. Um, but she had written a book, or rather, she had translated a book that her friend Frode, an elf, had written, and I ordered that online, and she sent it to me and sent me a little email afterwards, just like thanking me for ordering the book. And I thought, like, this is an opportunity to engage in conversation. So I basically just said, captivated my imagination. I'd like to talk to you about making a film, and that started a 9-month-long pen pal friendship, actually. And I felt like I really got a chance to get to know her. And during that time, I was able to raise some development money to then go on my first shoot in Iceland. And once I met her, I felt like I was meeting like a long lost aunt or something, like someone I had like known about my whole life and was like connected to. But it was just like kind of instant closeness and connection. I feel really lucky because not everyone is like that. When you ask to tell them about their lives. My main subjects in the last season, I found out about one of them, this man named Koilok, from two different sources, from a beautiful New Yorker article about the Oregon mushroom hunters, and also from the anthropological research of this phenomenal anthropologist named Anna Singh. And I was able to get his contact information from Anna, from Professor Singh. And he was a little hesitant at first because he's a really busy man. He, hikes over 10 miles a day in the woods, carrying just tons and tons of mushrooms. And the idea of a camera crew following him, he was worried it was going to slow him down and then he would lose money. He's also really protective of his mushroom patches because he called that his bank account. So, but we kind of started a friendship. We got to know each other without cameras present, and kind of through our conversations, he kind of started to realize that for him, he ended up wanting to make the film because he spent many hours and many, many days away from his young daughter to make money for her. And she didn't quite understand that. She was just like, "Oh, Daddy, where do you go?" She like wanted time with him, but he had to make money. And so he thought that maybe this film could be a record of like what he does and how he provides for her. And so that was like, oh, that's so moving that this can do that. And then with Roger, our other main character, he was in very poor health and was sober he was trying to become sober for the first time, pretty much since he was a teenager. And we met him when he was in his mid 70s. So he kind of at first was he's the kind of person who was like, no trespassing, like skull and bone signs all over. He was like very like, do not come here kind of guy. But he's kind of saw our film as an opportunity to kind of tell his story because he knew that he didn't have much time. And there was a lot of trauma he was reckoning with based on his own experience in the war. So for him, it was a moment where he could kind of set to film his own record. So I guess that's my long way of saying, for me, like, it's like relationships with the subjects are the most important thing. And it's about finding meaning for not just me to tell the story I want to tell, but for them to tell the story they want to tell, and what is important to them. I really see it as like a collaboration. It's all of our work together. It's not, it's not some sort of kind of top down kind of
hierarchy,
observing these people in a vacuum kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's kind of beautiful to see like how, like, you have this one idea, this one, goal, and then to see how it like affects others and how it can grow, and like I had no idea it could have this meaning or that it could, have this impact. And I'm always fascinated by that. So that's awesome. It's really nice to hear. Is there, like, with this film, I guess at the end of the day, what do you want people to come away with from it? Like, what, like, your intention? Like, they're going to take whatever they can, right? But like, what is your intention and what you want them to leave with?
I think my intention with this film is really to understand that you can enter into a relationship with the natural world. Like Ragga is literally friends with nature. And I think by doing so, you can understand the connectedness between all things. And that's, to me, is just such an important lesson when thinking about everything from our responsibility in terms of how we relate to the natural world. And also just like to other humans. When you see everything as related, you can see how your actions affect somebody else or affect, a rock, but it turns out that rock is home to beings. So I think it makes us, gives a heightened awareness about kind of the beauty and precarity of life. And I just think that's an important lesson for us all to hold. And I hope people will start to kind of just maybe guess and wonder, just like kind of open themselves up to mystery a little bit, which is just, I think, a fun thing to do.
Yeah. Especially now, like we need it. We need it more than ever.
Need it. Yeah.
We like to leave our listeners with like next steps or motivations to kind of like further whatever the film is doing. And I do feel like this film ends with, some satisfaction, but just throughout, I feel like there is like a lingering sadness of just like how we got here, and like what is next. And it's not like 100% win. It was like, you take what you can get kind of thing at the end. So I guess, what are some ways that you suggest for like our listeners or viewers, like as next steps to further help either the environment or like, even if it's just expanding the way of thinking, and also to help with like just financial crises? I know you don't have all the answers, but just like whatever it is that you have.
Definitely don't have all the answers, but I would I love that you do this. I think that there's so many different ways, big and small, to get involved in what's happening to our planet right now. The IPCC report was just, there was a huge report that was just released last week about just the dire state of our planet that so many people around the world just feel and can see when they look out the window, if their house isn't actually on fire.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's such dire times that we're in. And there's all kinds of things, little and small, from if you're lucky and privileged enough to own a home, solar panels, and smaller things to just understanding kind of your own carbon budget, what you can do to reduce your own carbon footprint. 350.org is one organization that has really easy to understand kind of steps of like what you can do, little and big, that can fit your own kind of budget. But there's incredible work being done on every level. All kinds of local activists who are working towards environmental justice in their communities, and then of course international policy and people really lobbying to get policy changed. So I fully encourage people to look into how to get more involved.
Yeah. The first step is just, being knowledgeable, just knowing that there is a crisis and that we can do something. Like, we're not going to have all the answers. At the end of the day, it is, these bigger companies, nothing to do with us. But we, at least to ease our conscience, I guess, can do something. Kat, do you have any last questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I guess it's just like, is there anything in the future that you're potentially thinking about covering, or are you still just really relishing in this moment?
I'm loving this moment. It's really exciting. It's out in the world, but I'm excitedly working on a film right now about two French volcanologists named Katia and Maurice Kraft, who fell in love in the late 60s and roamed the planet with a camera, trying to capture the most spectacular imagery of eruptions possible, only to die in one in 1991.
Wow.
So the film is kind of a love story, not just their love for each other, but their love for the earth. And in it, the film uses their own archives to kind of tell their story. And I'm obsessed. I don't know if you can see it here, but I have like all of their books.
That's so awesome.
so many more, but it's been fun, and it's similar themes of like, what it means to love the earth, but through kind of the explosive imagery of volcanoes. So
That's
that's what's up
awesome.
next.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love
very
that.
cool.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm like writing things down. I'm like, all right, next time we might call you back in to talk about that one. Is there any last thoughts that you have that you want our listeners to know?
I know, just thank you so much for having me. If you're interested in the film, you can catch it on Apple TV, iTunes. Just search for Seer and the Unseen, or altavod.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And our website is theseerandtheunseen.com. So if people are interested, those are some ways to see the film and get in touch. We're going to have kind of a limited theatrical release to safety COVID and safety willing, but just thank you so much for having me on. This is a lot of fun to talk to you both, and
yes,
I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. And we'll include all the links to your social media, and we'll also dig up some of those environmental activist groups too, so that if you are listening and you want to help, if you're motivated, definitely watch this film. If you definitely haven't, just like, you will be so thankful that you took the time to escape into this to this world, and to learn to appreciate the one that we're in, and then you can help keep it here, help protect it, and protect the elves that maybe we can't see that are right in our backyard. So thank you so much, Sarah. And with that being said, Kat,
Don't get married.
don't eat your kids.